There are rumors out there around the Pelicans, and we're going to try and make sense of what's true regarding Brandon Ingram and why the Pelicans didn't announce Willie Green's contract extension, plus what's their biggest need. It's a Tuesday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here we go on this Tuesday. We're going to look at a rumor around Brandon Ingram. I want to get into why Willie Green's extension wasn't announced because, while I don't think it's a big deal, it is kind of weird, isn't it? And we'll talk about that. Plus, what's the Pelicans' actual biggest need this offseason? We're going to get into all of that in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Rumors, coaching stuff. We're going to get into a lot of draft preview, free agency, do a little bit more review on the season this year too. And just subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Tell a friend about the show as well. So let's start with the kind of newish rumor around Brandon Ingram. And this one comes from Evan Sidery, who actually used to host Locked On Suns for a little while. And he basically says that the Pelicans aren't going to extend Brandon Ingram, that they are moving along with kind of Trey Murphy as the wing of the future, and that the Pelicans aren't going to extend Brandon Ingram. I don't agree with this statement. You know, it says all signs point towards New Orleans prioritizing Murphy over Ingram as their wing of the future. I don't think that this is totally factual. I think this is a little bit of speculation, and the fact that there's no kind of sourcing on this makes it seem like it's just being piggybacked off of Brian Windhorst, who was talking about this on The Jump on ESPN. The Pelicans would happily extend Brandon Ingram at very many numbers. Now, he's due for a maximum of $208 million on a 4-year extension. Maybe they don't want to offer him that max, and we even kind of talked about why they might need to in a show the other day. They might not want to offer him a max, but look, if he came in and said, I'll take $100 million over 4 years, less than what he's making now, you think they wouldn't jump at doing something like that? You know, it's a small choice in words, but it does really matter in this. And that just kind of hints at negotiations will be happening, and this says there will be no negotiations. That's not true. Brandon Ingram had a bad playoffs. There's questions about his fit with Zion Williamson, who I think the team should build around going forward. But that doesn't mean he's a bad player, particularly because he played very well on the defensive side of the ball this year. I think that's important. You don't just let talent walk. And as we talked about in saying why maybe they need to just offer him a max right away, you're not going to get the full trade value for him. And if there's one thing we know about this team is they're going to try and maximize every asset. So to come out and say they're not going to offer him a contract extension, that's not right. They just might not offer him the max, though they still might need to go that route. So that's, as I said, it's a small distinction, but it's very important when it comes to this sort of thing. You know, Trey Murphy is eligible for a rookie extension that he's going to get $20 to $25 million. It's going to be somewhere in that range. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Trey Murphy is very good. And more on this in the third segment too, when we kind of talk about the biggest need for the Pelicans. But he's also not the same player as Brandon Ingram. They have very different skill sets. We're going to talk a little bit about creation, playmaking in the third segment here. That's not what Trey Murphy does, at least not yet. He can grow into that, but he's not the same type of playmaker and creator that Brandon Ingram is. So if you take Brandon Ingram out and simply put in Trey Murphy, there is something to be said for that. The Pelicans, when Zion Williamson was on the court with Brandon Ingram, had a worse net rating. It was positive, but it was worse than when Zion shared the court with Trey Murphy. And oddly, you didn't really see those three guys really play together a ton. Not very many possessions with that. So there's something to be said for having Zion and Trey out there. But it doesn't mean it's just a one-for-one swap, and I think you'll just definitely see a different starting lineup. They could have Trey Murphy in there in the future, but it also, in theory, could have Brandon Ingram. There's ways maybe you can go about doing this sort of thing. One of the biggest questions was, should you start Trey over a guy like Herb Jones, right? Put him out there with Zion, with Ingram, with CJ, Jonas Valanciunas. And there was an argument to be said for that, and that kind of went away when Trey had that meniscus injury earlier on in the year. But I don't think it's simply as, okay, they're going to go with Trey as the wing of the future. The other thing with this is, look, you can never have too many wings like this. You can never have too many wings in today's NBA that can do this sort of thing. So having Trey, having Ingram, Najee Marshall is going to be gone, but let's use him as the example right now for it. That's all really, really useful. That is an incredible depth at that position and something that makes teams very jealous of that. So you don't just let a guy walk and go, we're going to prioritize this one. If you can keep all of them, you definitely try and do that. So I think this is a false rumor. Again, a max for Ingram, maybe, maybe not, but certainly not no extension and trading him for way less than what you would normally get in that return for him. That's not a great position to be in if you're trying to get a guy like Trae Young, or I have some other trades that we're going to kind of work through this offseason until potentially or not something ends up happening. So I don't like this rumor. It's not that I don't like it, that I want them to offer BI a max. And I don't care either way, right? I just want this team to be competitive as to the highest level of their ability next season. And if that means you're trading Brandon Ingram, get as much in return for him as possible, because he is still a very talented player, even if he had about as awful of a playoff series as we could see and didn't really fit in well this year. But he's also 2 years removed from a near 40-point playoff game. Right? You can definitely win with him. And until this year, we were not concerned about really his fit with Zion Williamson. So if Brandon Ingram kind of commits to you and says, like, I'm going to change, I'm going to be different. We talked about this on the show. If you're an everydayer, well, then you can go forward with that sort of thing. But it kind of depends on Ingram and where you feel he is as a player and what he's kind of, whether there's growth there or not. But they're going to certainly offer him an extension. It just might not be the max. That's different than saying they're not going to offer him an extension at all, or that they're prioritizing Trey Murphy over him, because they're very different type of players. They do very different things. And you need all of those skill sets out there. So that makes me question this as well. More on that a little bit kind of tangentially in the third segment of today's show. When we look at like creation and the Pelicans' biggest need, point guard, something else. I actually don't think it's a position, and I'll tell you why. That's coming up in the third segment of today's show. But I want to get into this one next, as I've been asked a lot about this, and we just didn't really have time to talk about it until right now. Why was Willie Green's extension kept secret? Because yeah, it's weird. While it might not be a big deal, it's weird. And let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something, and you might even be thinking about the same things this week. They still got to fix the officiating. They still have to fix the officiating in the NBA, because I'm so tired of talking about it on here, but unfortunately, we have to. So therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is also brought to you by the NOLA Star Bar. I want to invite you there, right down the street from the Smoothie King Center. So next season, your pre- and post-game libations can be at the NOLA Star Bar. They have every Pelicans home game and away game throughout the season on their big screen. They're also going to have the NBA playoffs on there too. There's a pool table, video poker, an internet jukebox, and karaoke every Wednesday night. And they feature over 100 worldwide spirits and a hefty selection of local beers. It's a true Pelicans fans bar. They even created and produced a Pelicans anthem called Fly, Pelicans Fly, complete complete with a music video. So join your fellow Pelicans fans at NOLA Star Bar at 212 Loyola Avenue, open 7 days a week, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m., and check out their Pelicans anthem on the NOLA Star Bar page on YouTube. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about the team, making sense of rumors here, why certain things may or may not be true. And we're going to make sense right now of the Willie Green extension, as much as we know about it, which isn't a ton, and why it's kind of weird. And I agree with you that it is. So we'll talk about that here in a second. But right now, for your second listen, go check out Locked On Saints. They're still doing a breakdown from the draft. Everything you want to know. Ross Jackson has got it covered. Go make sure Locked On Saints is your second listen today. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it came out through a Yahoo article kind of in the middle way of the season back in like March, I think it was, maybe April, that Willie Green had gotten a contract extension. And this hadn't been reported anywhere else. And a lot of people have been wondering about his status. You know, while the team had 49 wins this year, they definitely underachieved. And a lot of that was some of the tactical acumen or lack thereof. And we talked about this in yesterday's show when it comes to Willie Green and the lack of just like adjustments, kind of focusing too much on defense versus offense. So to kind of like not mention the extension is a little weird. And I think there's two things at play with this. And neither maybe will make you feel okay about this, and that's all right too. So you never want a head coach going into the final year of their deal without, it's just like an expiring contract, just going into the final year of a deal. There's a couple reasons for this, particularly on a team that has playoff aspirations. You know, say Willie Green didn't have this extension. He was in the final year of his deal. His contract's going to end, say, on July 1 when the new league year starts, or June 1, whatever it is. If that's the case, and he had made the playoffs, say they had gotten the 4th seed, right? Say they had gotten home court advantage. They won 50 games, 52 games, whatever it might be, a few more wins, let's say. You know, all of a sudden now, you've got to give him a new deal, and he would have all of the leverage. He would hold the Pelicans for significantly more money than they probably want to pay him. That's not a great position to be in as a franchise. It's not my money. Shouldn't care or matter to you or I, but this is just explaining how they operate, right? They're not going to go into a position where the head coach is going to have so much leverage that he can demand more money. So it makes sense for them, or it makes sense that they would, I should say, extend him at the beginning of the season for a cheaper amount than what he would potentially get if they go into the playoffs. Even making 49 wins and getting bounced out in the first round, he can say, I just took your team to the playoffs. That doesn't happen very often. So if that's the case, give me more money. He has all the leverage going into these negotiations, and that's not a position any team wants to be in. So I wonder if that's one of the reasons why they just gave him an extension. So this is something that we probably should have expected. And I didn't expect him to not have one. It just didn't even cross my mind that it hadn't been announced. So you can't really have him be, a lame duck coach, an expiring coach. At that point, just fire him, right? And get the other head coach if you know you're not going to bring him back because there's nothing good for that. The other part of it is this, and this is something that's not popular, and I get it, but it's just how the team operates. These are sometimes just facts, right? This team doesn't really operate with a ton of transparency, not around injuries and availability or anything like that. Christian Clark reported in NOLA.com that David Griffin had gotten an extension. That wasn't reported out or blasted out or anything like that. This is just how they operate. They keep things quiet for whatever reason. Maybe they think it gives them a competitive advantage. Whatever. It doesn't honestly matter. This is just how they go, and we either accept it or don't. You can like it or not like it. They're not going to really change, unfortunately, when it comes to this sort of thing, right? We've seen them be a lack of transparency around Zion's injuries. And the injuries and things like that, I get, and it makes sense to me. But when it comes to something like this, contracts like this, it seems they should announce this, right? The team announces player deals. They signed Matt Ryan. They signed Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. We get those press releases during the season. The Mavericks just announced that Jason Kidd got an extension. I get keeping some things secret, and I get that teams don't want to be fully transparent for whatever reason because they think it gives them a competitive advantage. Maybe, and this is being generous to the Pelicans here, if that extension's not announced, maybe you have good coaches reaching out to the Pelicans being like, hey, keeping Willie Green, I would come and coach there, or I would, whatever. It's an extreme side of it, and I don't think that's the case. But you get what I'm saying. They find some value in doing that. I don't know what it is. I couldn't really tell you for sure, but this is just how the team does it. It's weird, though, and I don't think this is particularly great. I'm not expecting transparency from this team, even if I would like it, when it comes to a lot of the players and stuff like that. But keep people informed on the head coach. Like, there's no reason not to. I don't truly, I'll be honest, I have had some people say like they wouldn't have renewed their tickets if they knew Willie Green had an extension. Okay, fair. I'll believe you on that. I don't think that's by and large. And I don't think they did this and kept it secret because Willie Green isn't popular. He's not getting booed at games. And as someone who kind of hears it from everybody with this, I don't think he's that unpopular of a head coach. I think there's some people who are very vocal about it and want to scream that at him. But overall, I don't think that's the majority of the fan base. That's just my read on it. You may agree or disagree when it comes to that. So even if that's the case, there's no reason to keep it secret. Like, there's just no reason to do this. And if it can help people make better informed decisions with their money on season tickets and other things, then it's just the right thing to do. And if it doesn't impact anything at all, and again, I don't really think it does, then announce it, because it can impact others like that. The other thing that I find weird about it is, doesn't announcing that you're signing him to an extension show a lot of like support for him? And, don't you want to like kind of build your people up? They announced that Jason Kidd extension, had nice quotes. How good does Jason Kidd feel? How empowered does he feel to go and do his job and try and be the best coach that he can be? For Willie Green, who needs to make some changes, empower him with maybe some limits there. But this doesn't, if I'm him, I'm a little bit worried maybe that you don't want to publicly announce this sort of thing. Why? What does that mean, right? Am I one step away from making the wrong, one step away, one bad decision away from getting fired? Clearly not, because there were a bunch of them. But you get what I'm saying. Like, show support for your coach, just as Willie Green shows support for these players. I think that's an important thing in building a pretty healthy organization, and that's not something that's happened here. This is weird. Like, there's no getting around it that this is weird. Ultimately, I don't think it really matters on anything. They have a reason for doing it. We don't know what that reason is, but they have a reason for not doing it. And maybe that's just simply, we operate this way. This is how we're going to do it. And they're just not going to announce those sorts of things, just like they didn't announce the Griffin extension and things like that. So I think it's kind of immaterial. I assumed he would have been back next year. I've had a lot of people saying, are there going to be coaching changes? Like, no, they're not. At least not at the head coach. I think they'll change the bench up a little bit. They certainly need to do something like that. But overall, like, this is how they operate, and it's just kind of part and parcel of being a Pelicans fan. Whether that's good or bad, fair or unfair, right or wrong, I couldn't tell you. But something like this, like, announce it. There's no reason to have not done that, I think, because I don't think it matters to anything. So I don't think there's a reason to not announce it, but why not do that? Why not support your coach? Let people know what's going on. And it's turned it into a story, right? Like, this part of this, it's turned it into a story around the fan base that it doesn't need to be. If you had just announced it, cool. I don't think people would, before the season started, I don't think people would have been upset. I really don't. And would have just been that simple, but they didn't. And now we're here talking about it on Locked On Pelicans. Let me know what you think about the contract extension for Willie Green in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, what's the Pelicans' biggest need? Point guard? Center? It's not that. It's not a position. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about DoorDash because you know what? I'm going to be a good son this Mother's Day. I got everything already taken care of because I used DoorDash. It's coming up this weekend. So go make your mom smile. Get on DoorDash and surprise her with flowers or gifts from the brand she loves, delivered either the same day or in the future. Here's the thing. I scheduled it all. Hey, Mom, I know you're listening right now. You've got some flowers coming. because I scheduled it with DoorDash because they just made it super easy for me. Get on there, choose what you want. I thought DoorDash was just getting food delivered for you. It's so much more than that. And now it's going to make me the best son possible on Mother's Day. So get all of your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA. Order now using DoorDash today. Terms apply. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join almost 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now for your second listen, the Locked On 24/7 channel. It's awesome. Are you watching Fox Sports, ESPN all day? They're just yelling at you. They're not talking about the stuff you want to hear. Well, we've got Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling, without all of the hot takes. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So this one's not a rumor that we're going to talk about, but I think it's a big talking point, and I think it's a little bit of a myth. And we'll get into this more this offseason too. What's the biggest need for the Pelicans? A lot of you are going to a lot of you do this. You go point guard, point guard, point guard, point guard. I don't think it's point guard. I don't think it's point guard. It's not a center either. And this kind of ties into the discussion we had with Brandon Ingram and Trey Murphy, right? The biggest need the Pelicans have right now is playmaking, shot creation. Those two things. I don't care what position it comes from. What's a point guard do? He sets up others to score, right? That's playmaking. That's shot creation for others. That's all. That's what this team needs. I don't care what position it comes from. I think when you have Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson on the court together, there's enough playmaking. There's enough shot creation for others, and they do it in different ways. So that works. Zion draws two to the ball and can kind of play make because he's drawing a double team every time. Chris Paul doesn't draw two to the ball, but play makes doing something else. You simply need playmaking. I know Kyrie Irving's not necessarily thought of as a playmaker and is more of a scorer, but that's a guy that dishes a lot of assists because he's attacking the basket and drawing in extra defenders and then spraying the ball out and leads to good ball movement. And that's one of the reasons why Dallas is having a lot of success. Right? Kyrie Irving is still averaging over 5 assists per game. Luka does it with his fancy passing and kind of the way he can manipulate a defense with the variety of different looks and ways that he can score. It all comes in very many different ways. I don't care who does it, as long as this team gets it. They need more shot creation for others. They need more playmaking for others. However you go about doing that, that's important. You need it at all the different positions too. Right? You have it in the front court with Zion. You have it on the wing with Brandon Ingram. You need it more in the backcourt because CJ hasn't really provided it like that. You have Jose Alvarado, but there's limitations there. And he didn't have a great playoff series either. So yeah, you could use another guard that has playmaking. You want to call that a point guard? That's fine. Combo guard, I'm fine with that too. Even a 2 guard, a shooting guard that can do that. However you get it and from whatever position, you want to have a lot of that. And that's something that the Pelicans have lacked. That's why when I said, if you're looking at Trey Murphy, the Pelicans choosing Trey Murphy over Brandon Ingram, well, then you need to make sure you get another guard or playmaker in that starting lineup because you are missing that. You are absolutely going to be missing that. That's not a great position to be in. So I don't think it's as simple as they're choosing this one player over the other. But when it comes to the biggest need, it's absolutely more playmaking. Guard might be the easiest thing, but I'll ask you this. How many pure point guards are out there in the league right now? When you look at all the teams left, Luka kind of is. But who else, right? When you look at Tyrese Halliburton, he's not like a he's not a pure point guard. He does that off of his scoring. Boston, do they have a lead guard? Not really. The Knicks have Jalen Brunson, but he's a score first type of guy who then can create for others that way. Cleveland has Donovan Mitchell, who's a score first guy. The Clippers, well, they're out. It doesn't matter. Minnesota doesn't have it. It's Anthony Edwards. They have a secondary third creator in Mike Conley, but it's Anthony Edwards who's kind of the lead guy for them. Denver, it's Jokic, but he's a big man, not a point guard, right? Shai Gilgeous-Alexander isn't a point guard, and when you look at the backcourt with him, they don't really have one either. I don't think it needs to be a pure point. I think it just simply needs to be playmaking, and I think that's the most important thing. Playmaking. Simple as that. Whatever position, however you can find it, get more of that along with shooting. More shooting, more playmaking. Those playmakers create open shots for those shooters, which are then going to space the court, hopefully, for Zion Williamson a little bit more. That's why I've said I want to see a backup point guard. Say we're keeping the same roster, I would like to have seen a backup point guard with these guys. When Zion's off and Ingram's on, put another point guard out there with him. Absolutely. When Ingram's off, Zion's on, pair him with another point guard too. That would have been good. That would have worked. Would have liked to have seen that. That's why I wanted them to kind of go after that at the NBA's trade deadline. Didn't end up happening. They didn't end up making, really any moves when it comes to it. But I do think more playmaking, more shot creation for others. You can have guys that can create for their own too. Brunson's that kind of guy, right? CJ at times is kind of a create your own kind of guy, taking a lot more off the dribble, pull up threes like that because to make teams respect him. That's important, I think. So more things like that, overall on this team are going to help their offense and go a long way. You saw that lack of playmaking, lack of just shot creation at all, whether it's for one's own or for their teammates in the playoffs against the Oklahoma City Thunder. However you do it, and there's different ways to go about doing that. That's the type of thing that I really want to see this team go and try and get. Don't have to be a guard position necessarily. It's just got to be more playmaking, more creation. That's the most important thing. One of the things that's worth noting is Zion with Jose Alvarado on the court this year was almost a plus 13 in terms of net rating. That's really, really good. Pairing another guard like that with Zion, another guy that can kind of play, make, and create for others, and Jose was the best that this team had. And he's not elite at it, right? If you can get someone who's even better than Jose, imagine what that could be and how much that might unlock this team on offense in a way that we hadn't seen before. That would be a real great thing and something that I think would really elevate them. And we want to see more of that. And this is coming from someone who absolutely loves Jose's, arguably my favorite player on the team right now. But the offense was freaking good when Jose and Zion shared the court. Now, Trey's in there a lot too, because you need the shooting there. And that can be important. So Zion is your playmaker along with Jose, and then you have shooting in Trey. You see how it starts to kind of come together there. But if you don't have Trey in there, those lineups really did look different. If you look at, so this is somewhat interesting. It's a small sample size. Let's roll with this before we wrap up the show now. I'm looking at the 4 most used lineups with Jose and Zion in here. The 3 best ones have Trey Murphy in there, and those lineups are freaking good. Real good. You get to the 4th most used one. Now it's 50 possessions, 49 possessions. It goes from they're a plus 13, but this one is a minus 34.3 when you take Trey Murphy out of it, right? You need that shooting. You need those type of complementary players, and the Pelicans don't have enough of that. That's an intriguing thing to kind of look at. Maybe get more into that later in the week when it comes to all of this. So there you go. Playmaking. Shot creation for others, however you want to define it. That's what they need more so than just a specific position. You can get that at the wing. You can get it in the front court, wherever. Guard, though, would be helpful just to balance the roster out a little bit more. So let me know what you think about the rumor the Pelicans won't extend Brandon Ingram. I think that is false. Do you agree it's weird they didn't extend Willie Green? Does it honestly matter? Or that they didn't announce Willie Green's extension, or does it honestly not matter? And then what do you think the Pelicans' biggest need is? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Thank y'all so much for listening. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.